Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Danielle, and I thank you so much for coming. Today, I'm going to be discussing the legalization of marijuana, as well as how beneficial it can be to us if it were utilized. The hemp plant, most commonly known as marijuana, has been legal for most of human history and even showed promise of steps towards a greener planet. Since the 1600s, it has been used for an array of things, including cloth, food, incense, remedies, rope, and canvas. In Virginia, in 1619, the first ever marijuana law was passed, which actually ordered farmers to grow it. Over the next 300 years, this law, and many others like it, continued to encourage the growth of the plant. It wasn't until the 1930s that marijuana was made illegal under selfish intentions and false allegations. Today, the legalization of it can be beneficial to our nation and economy. Since the 1900s, racism in the U.S. was at its highest. The Mexicans were crossing the border into the western states, and large farmers were taking advantage of their arrival and hiring them as cheap labor. This didn't go so well with the smaller farmers, and tensions began to rise between the two. Eventually, marijuana became recognized as a drug affiliated with Mexicans who brought it across the border and smoked it. California would be the first to outlaw it, with the surrounding states quick to follow the prohibition, which targeted against the Mexican-American population. A Montana legislator was quoted saying, "When some beet field peon takes a few traces of this stuff, he thinks he has just been elected president of Mexico." A Texas senator was also quoted saying, "All Mexicans are crazy, and this stuff is what makes them crazy." During this time, the eastern states felt that they were being overwhelmed with Latin Americans and the rise of the new jazz culture, and soon these groups became affiliated with marijuana and started to become subject to racial slurs. In 1934, in a newspaper article stated, "Marijuana influences Negroes to look at white people in the eye, step on white men's doorsteps, and look at a white woman twice." It's sad that we've come such a long way since that era, and we now recognize the equal rights of all individuals. But the racist laws that were passed in spite of ethnicities are still passed today. The all-out war against marijuana really began with Harry Anslinger, who was named the director of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, which at the time was a new division of the Treasury Department. He saw this position as an opportunity to advance his career, but he knew that just outlawing cocaine and opiates wouldn't be enough to take his agency to the full potential that he desired. So he began targeting marijuana and working reluctantly to ensure that it was legalized federally. In doing this, he used racism and fear to convince the nation that marijuana was a problem. He preached that along with marijuana came violence, and this widespread campaign began known as reefer madness. It's unfortunate that the growth of such a useful plant was federally outlawed, and this ongoing expensive war against marijuana blossomed and spiraled out of control just because of one man's desires. Anslinger was supported by others who would gain from the removal of hemp competition. Among them was William Hearst, who was the owner of the San Francisco Examiner, which was a major newspaper that printed Anslinger's fabricated stories. Hearst was by far the most important contributor to the negative propaganda surrounding marijuana. He was motivated by his hatred for Mexicans, as well as his investment in the timber industry, which was threatened by the development of hemp paper. And also, these crazy stories really increased his newspaper sales. Another supporter was the DuPont Chemical Company, who patented nylon and would gain from the removal of the use of hemp fibers. There were also several pharmaceutical companies who were unable to set the dosages for cannabis, and they knew that people being allowed to grow their own medicine would diminish the need for them to purchase from large companies such as themselves. So all of these supporters had no problem eliminating their hemp competition through the use of Anslinger's fear tactic rumors. With his serpent tongue, Anslinger convinced people to fear marijuana. There were actually stories that professional killers were given hash and tempted with the devil's garden of paradise in exchange for their deadly services. And it was said that once the effects of the drug wore off, these killers would fulfill the devil's wishes. In the New Orleans Medical and Surgical Journal, an article quoted Dr. A.E. Fossier saying, "Under the influence of hash, those fanatics madly rush at their enemies and ruthlessly massacre everyone within their grasp." Anslinger created countless false and absurd marijuana stories, which became known as the Gore Files. And in these files, he used Americans' fear and hatred of colored people, as well as the rise of a new culture. One quote from the files stated, "White children are being captured by Mexicans, blacks, and other foreigners." Another one was, "Reefer makes the darkies think they're as good as white men." Anslinger also falsified the effects of marijuana, causing people to live in terror of it. One quote was, "It is an addictive drug which produces in its users insanity, criminality, and death." And another one of my favorites is, "You smoke a joint and you're likely to kill your brother." These allegations are absolutely absurd, and they would never have been believed if they were told today. But Anslinger continued to spread his lies, and he and his supporters secretly drafted up a bill to take to Congress. The Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 was passed under false beliefs with no debate or true knowledge of what it entailed. Dr. William Woodward was the only one opposed to the plan at one of the hearings, and he was the legislative counsel of the American Medical Association, and the AMA was upset that a non-marijuana related statement that they had made had been twisted to appear as if it were a campaign for Anslinger. The AMA felt that there was no physical or scientific evidence to support all of these ludicrous lies, and they questioned if there was, why had the bill been created in secret rather than publicized. Woodward felt that the people were also confused by the deception of false tongue, and that those who didn't oppose the bill didn't do so because of the terminology that was used. He argued that if the words cannabis or hemp would have been used rather than marijuana, people would have opposed it, but they just hadn't made the connection that the two were actually the same thing. People had come to know marijuana as a horrific drug, and they were more than happy to legalize it, but what they didn't know is they were also illegalizing hemp, which was one of their major cash crops. It's unfortunate, but the committee did find yellow journalism, which was filled with racial insults and murderous stories, to be more convincing than the rational thought of the AMA. And once the bill reached the House floor, nobody knew much about it, and congressman asked what the AMA thought about it, and a committee member falsely stated that the AMA supported it 100%. And pretty much based on that one single lie, marijuana became illegal on the federal level. And although these irrational stories of the past have faded and many people don't even know about them, the Anslinger's lies and propaganda have left a permanent scar on people's opinion of marijuana. Those that are opposed to the re-legalization of it have been brainwashed by this false image that was created so long ago, and they fail to recognize its potential uses. Over the years, our nation has accumulated a massive debt that continues to escalate with each passing day. According to the U.S. debt clock, as of April 5th, 2012, our nation is nearly $16 trillion in debt. On January 9th, 2012, USA Today stated that our nation's debt had surpassed the value of our economy. This colossal debt needs to be taken care of before it exceeds the point of recovery. And the growth of marijuana can provide our nation with the severely needed revenue to do that. Alcohol revenue brings over $5.6 billion to our nation, and that wouldn't be possible if Prohibition hadn't ended so many years ago. And with the multi-use marijuana provides, it can give our nation far greater profits than that. It can not only produce the revenue to lessen our debt, but it can also save us money on marijuana-related crimes. The legalization, or at least decriminalization of marijuana, can save us billions of dollars. The stats from the U.S. Department of Justice Bureau stated that $1 billion a year is spent by taxpayers just to incarcerate marijuana offenders. And then an additional $8 billion is spent in all other criminal justice costs for them. The people's money can be spent on far greater things, like more serious and harmful drugs and crimes. And I find it really ironic that the U.S. spends so much money enforcing the illegalization of a product that can save us so much money and create such a large profit, as well as much needed jobs that we need today. Legalization of marijuana can lead to countless job opportunities. According to the Bureau of Labor of Statistics, last year, the average U.S. unemployment rate was 9%. And although this is a 0.6% decrease from the year before, it's still way too high. There are way too many Americans living paycheck to paycheck, praying that they can afford to pay their monthly bills. This once great nation is now forcing its citizens to live in close poverty and fear due to its policy mistakes. And even if just part or all of the marijuana plant were utilized, it can provide a solution to our falling job market. Every part of the cannabis plant can be used to help our nation thrive. There are over 25,000 known uses for the plant, and among them are fuel, food, fiber, and medicine. The legalization of marijuana can create thousands of job opportunities, such as growers, drivers, bud tenders, farmers, physicians, manufacturer workers. There's just so many possibilities. And before the illegalization of marijuana, it was so beneficial to man that there were laws ordering it to be grown. And after centuries of its valuable use, it became illegal due to egotistical intentions and deceitful claims. Our nation and economy can once again prosper with the aid of this multi-purpose plan. There were no legitimate reasons for the illegalization, and it only occurred because of racial insults, selfish desires, competition elimination, fears, lies, and deceits. The legalization of it can help our nation out of debt, eliminate marijuana-related crimes, and provide much-needed jobs for Americans who are struggling to survive. And I just want to thank you once again for coming out, and I really hope that you take into consideration everything that was said today, and I hope that you all have a wonderful day. Thanks again.